Good morning and welcome to Managerial Accounting. It is February 17th and we finished up chapter 18 on Tuesday. So chapter 18, as you know, is the last chapter on our first exam. So the chapter 18 problem should be submitted for grading by the end of the day to be on track with our due dates. And we're starting chapter 19 today, which is not on the exam. The chapter 19 pre-quiz should also be submitted for grading by the end of the day. I just wanted to remind people that this semester, unlike last semester, and I have no idea why this is the case, it probably has something to do with the same reason that the assignments aren't showing up in the Blackboard calendar for you guys, but the grades are not coming over automatically from See Now as they did last semester. So I'm pulling them over manually. And for that reason, if I were to pull a grade over and then the grade changed, I wouldn't know that. I'm not going to, every time I pull grades over, go back to chapter 15 and check everything. So I am not pulling grades over until you hit the submit for grading. So if it still shows that you're working on it, that you're active and haven't submitted it for grading, even if you have a grade, I'm not pulling that grade into the Blackboard grade book. So please make sure that when you are done working on something that you hit submit for grading. If you look at the My Grades area, if you look at the My Grades area in Blackboard, you can see anytime I bring in a grade. So if you notice that you're missing a bunch of grades that are for things that are already due, the first thing you should do is check to make sure you have submitted them for grading in See Now. We are not there yet, but we are coming up on 6-week grades. And so it will be important that you have submitted all of the work that's due, that you have submitted that for grading, because at the time of 6-week grades, I will enter zeros for anything that you have not yet submitted. And so your grade, even though I'm telling you, you have more time, the assignments are still open for you in Cengage, I will, in order to give you an accurate view of where you are in the class, I will enter zeros for anything that hasn't been submitted for grading at that time. So please just take a look, make sure that you are submitting your grades. I can't tell you what day it was, maybe Monday, I went through and updated all of the grades from See Now into Blackboard. So if you were to look at your grade book now in Blackboard and see a bunch of gaps and you're thinking, I know I did that, please check in See Now. You don't need to send me an email and say, you didn't put in my chapter 18 exercises, I will bring those in. But if you have gaps prior to that, again, please just make sure you submit them. And the next time that I go into Cengage to bring grades over, which will likely be another few days after exams have been submitted. So maybe on Monday, I will go in and pull grades again. But it is a manual process this semester, unlike last semester. Those links did not work. And so that's it. Questions about that? Questions about what's on the calendar? Everybody knows your first exam is due Sunday. You have that practice set out there if you are interested in using that. It is optional. It does not show up in your grade book in Blackboard at all. But I'm pretty confident it would help you do better on the exam because it would at least point out areas where you need to spend more time or get help. Okay. Remember, no class Tuesday. So when we finish class today, we will come back to finish up chapter 19 next Thursday, 1 week from today. Before we start the new chapter that's not on the exam, is there anything anyone wants to talk about from any of the 4 chapters that are on the exam, 15, 16, 17, and 18? So that's the intro chapter, and then job order costing, process costing, and activity-based costing. All right. Well, if you do realize you have questions, anything you want to go over with me before the exam, you know how to reach me. And let's go to Chapter 19. Chapter 19, as you can see, is support department and joint cost allocation. So, let me just tell you one thing. I don't need to show you. If you look in Blackboard in the reference materials folder for Chapter 19, you will see that there is a tutorial video for the mastery problem. As we're looking at the learning objectives here, I just want to skip down to learning objective 3 and kind of hopefully head off any anxiety related to this. In objective 3, we are looking at 3 different methods for allocating support department costs: direct, sequential, and reciprocal services. We are going to do the reciprocal services method in class. It is in the exercises. It is in the problem. It is not on our next exam because it's a little more challenging. It's more algebra. And so for some people that gives you kind of the willies and makes you a little anxious. So reciprocal services is not on the exam. However, there is an extra credit problem that's due if you choose to do it. It's due at the same time as the exam that is the reciprocal services method. So it is in the exercises and in the problem. There's a tutorial video for the problem. You don't have to do it on the regular exam, but there is an extra credit for that problem. Okay. So we're going to get started today with talking about what support departments are and how we allocate those. So this is a little bit different than what we did in activity-based costing, but you'll see some similarities. The processes that we use, at least at the beginning, are pretty similar to what we were doing under activity-based costing. But really, activity-based costing was most of what we did was focused on the manufacturing overhead and having a better way of recognizing what those costs are that become part of the cost of the product. What we're talking about in this chapter are support departments, which are not manufacturing departments. They are things like accounting and human resources and the billing department, that kind of thing. So as we look at this chapter, you're going to see some similarities. We're going to be using some of the same terminology. Like this might sound familiar, single plant-wide rate. We just went through that in chapter 18. But now we are looking more at support departments, those period expenses that come under selling, general, and administrative, and having a better way of allocating those. Okay. I'm going to call it the second half of the chapter, but it's really less than half of our time will be spent on joint cost allocation, which is about production. So if we are making a product that is combined into one process or one material, and then it splits off and becomes different products. So I think a really easy way, at least for me to think about that, is what I know, the refinery, the oil refinery. So it all starts out as crude oil, but we separate it into different products, and some of it becomes kerosene, and some becomes gasoline, and some becomes motor oil or grease. So that's what we're going to be talking about at the end of the chapter, is those when we talk about joint costs, we're talking about the cost, in my example, of the crude oil, and how do we decide how much of that cost goes with each of the individual products that come from that. And so we'll be looking at 4 different ways of allocating those joint costs, or the costs that we can't directly separate into the specific products because it started as one material, like that crude oil. So as I already really explained what support departments are. They are necessary to the running of our company, but they're not directly involved in production. So we're going to start out with the simplest way of allocating support department costs, which is that single plant-wide rate, and using just one allocation base. And that's what we'll look at in our first exercise, I believe. Give me 1 second. Just want to make sure I think I've really already covered what I wanted to say from here. Okay. Yeah. So as we look at those costs, and now as I'm thinking about this and looking at the examples in our exercises, some of these support department costs certainly are production costs. And I think I said we were looking at just, I know I said just looking at period costs, but we're actually going to be looking at some of those overhead costs as well that do become part of the product. Okay. I think, give me 1 second here. Should have gone through my PowerPoint first. Yeah, I don't know if we need to spend any more time on what's in this PowerPoint. Remember, you do have access to the PowerPoint, so some of you may find the flowchart kind of thing easier to understand than the narrative. And you're welcome to look at those in the PowerPoints that you have access to, but I'm not sure we really need to spend any more time talking about that. But before we go to our exercises, let me just point out, so we are going to be using, for support departments, we're going to be using 3 different methods, but again, the reciprocal services method, you are not required to do on the exam. The other 2 definitely are fodder for the exam. They are definitely something you need to be able to do. And so, as we discussed in the last chapter, why would we use a process that's more complicated? We would only use a process that's more complicated if we believe it gives us better information so that we can better manage our company, that we can make better, more well-informed decisions about how to run our business, about how to cost our product, and whether we should be producing specific products or not based on the cost profile. So you can see as we go from direct to sequential to reciprocal, it becomes more difficult, but also more accurate. And so we have to weigh those 2 things as we discussed in the last chapter. We have to weigh those two competing interests. Easy, more accurate. Easy, more accurate. Which one is more important? And I would probably suggest that more accurate is more important, but it needs to be materially different. And if the results we get, if you've already done the chapter 18 problem, you know that the last question on that problem asks, okay, we've got these 2 methods, which one should we use? One's harder, which one should we use? And one of the answers to that final question was, it doesn't give you different answers, so you should just use the one that's easier. And I'm not telling you the answer for chapter 18's problem, but if it were true that the costs, the results were the same using a single rate versus activity-based costing, then I would agree with that answer. Yes, don't use it if it's harder, but doesn't give you any better information. The same thing is going to be true in this chapter. I think that will always be true in our business. We want to be as efficient as possible, which means not creating unnecessary extra work for ourselves. But if doing that extra work leads us to a different and better conclusion about how to run our business, it's going to be important to take that extra step. All right. So let's go to our exercises at this point. We're just as well served to start. So in exercise 1, we're going to be using the direct method. What that means is we have one pool of support department costs. Now it doesn't specify here what the support department is, but we just saw some examples. We talked about some examples of what would make up a support department, not directly related to production, but supporting the running of the business. And so the direct method takes that one cost pool, which is $142,000, and allocates it to each one of the 3 production departments. So it's one step directly allocating from one cost pool to each production department based on the one cost driver. So we talked about in the last chapter some appropriate cost drivers. You had that multiple choice kind of question that we talked about on Tuesday, but didn't do the whole thing together. So that's going to be the same type of decision or determination we need to make here. Based on pooling together all of our support department costs, how would we best allocate that out to the production departments? Okay. So we don't allocate that support department to anything other than the production department. So how do we do this? Well, it's going to look very similar to you. It's going to look very much like what we did in activity-based costing when we used a single plant-wide rate. I can just put some guidance in here. So the first step is to calculate that single plant-wide rate. We start with our budgeted costs of $142,000, or these could be actual costs at the end of the period that we're allocating at the end of the period. What is our level of the cost driver? So again, we don't specify, uh-oh. My battery's low on my calculator. Hopefully it will get me through class. If not, I guess go back to my trusty cell phone calculator. So support department, we don't know what the cost driver is. We assume that they have identified a reasonable cost driver. We've talked in earlier chapters about some typical cost drivers, including things like machine hours, direct labor hours. If this is human resources, it could be the number of employees. Again, those same things we talked about last time. So our cost driver has 1,400 units for production department 1, 100 for production department 2, and 500 for production department 3, for a total of 2,000 units of whatever the cost driver is. We're being very generic and vague here. So we need to calculate our allocation rate, same process we used in the traditional overhead allocation. Only here we're talking about just one support department. So $142,000 for the support department divided by 2,000 units. $71 per unit. So whatever those units are, whatever the cost driver is, we're going to be allocating $71 worth of support department cost to each one of the production departments. Now this support department, let's say it is human resources. That support department could be, certainly is, supporting other support departments as well. If it's human resources, they're involved in every one of our employees, right? So some of the employees might be in the accounting department or might be in the maintenance department or something else. For the direct method, we ignore all of that. We just look at the one support department and allocate it directly to the production departments. We ignore the fact that they might be providing service to other support departments. So for, so for production department 1 with their 1,400 units, again, could be people, could be machine hours, could be, I have no idea what. We're just multiplying our allocation rate of $71 per unit to the production departments. And if we add those three together, we should find that we have fully allocated the cost. We fully allocated that support department to the production departments. So there's another way we could do this, or another way we could even think about this. We calculated a per unit cost. We could have done it like this. And so maybe this would be a more appealing way for you to do the calculations. Mathematically, it's exactly the same thing. So choose whichever method works for you. We could have done it like this. All right, the production department 1. Production department 1 uses 1,400 of the 2,000 units of service. 1,400 divided by 2,000 is, yeah, thank you. Just had to make my square a little bigger, or my box a little bigger there to fit it in, is 70%. So we could look at this as if, well, production department 1 uses 70% of the service from that support department. And so we're going to allocate them 70% of the cost. Again, you'll get exactly the same answer. It's just a little bit different way of thinking about it. Rather than calculating the unit cost and then assigning it, we calculate what percentage or what proportion of the support department's time, effort, cost is used by each one of the production departments. So you can, if you like that approach better, feel free to calculate the percentages and then allocate the cost based on those percentages. Mathematically, it's exactly the same thing.
Jumped ahead and ended up doing it that way.
Oh, did you? Yeah. So it's just a different way of thinking about it, but it's the same exact calculations. I just divided the total 142 by the 2,000 and then multiplied by 1,400. But again, math-wise, the equation is exactly the same, but just in a different order. So if you find that way more appealing, feel free to use that approach. So that is question or exercise number 1. Get my green check marks in there. Any questions about the direct method? So what makes this method not as helpful or not as accurate. Why did that last slide I showed you in the PowerPoint indicate that this is the least accurate of the three methods? The reason is because it ignores that the support departments could be supporting other support departments, not just the production departments, and that could skew the cost. In the end, the total 142,000 in this exercise, that total still ends up on the production departments. Whether we use the direct, the step down, or sequential method, it's sometimes called the step down method, or the reciprocal method, all three methods, the end result is exactly the same. The $142,000 in support costs end up on the production departments. But it's just how we divide that up. And if we ignore the fact that support departments might be supporting other support departments, we risk skewing those results. Totals are the same, just like we saw in activity-based costing. The totals are the same, but the split among these three production departments could be different. If it turns out they're the same, if we try the step-down / sequential method, if we try the reciprocal services method and we get the same answer, the same result, or materially the same, then we can just do it this way. This is the easiest. Questions, anybody? Whoops. All right, let's keep going then. It would have been kind of cool if we had 3 different exercises that all have the same information, but we use the 3 different methods. Pretty sure I looked for those and didn't find them. Didn't find what I was looking for. That's okay. In this next exercise, we are shifting to a different company, Snowy River Stallion Incorporated, which produces horse and rancher equipment. They don't produce horses, they produce horse equipment. Costs from support department 1 are allocated based on the number of employees. So that might be a human resource department. Costs from support department 2 are allocated based on asset value. So that might be something like buildings and grounds, maintenance, something like that. So, you know, presumably the more expensive stuff takes more work to maintain. Just a guess. Relevant department information is provided in the following table, and we're asked to use the sequential method. So I refer to this also as the step down method. So you'll see it called that as it means exactly the same thing. It means that we're going to take one step at a time instead of doing it all at once. If we use the direct method, let me show you the difference. Okay. If we use the direct method, we would take the support department 1 and allocate it to production department 1 and production department 2. And we would take the cost from support department 2 and we would allocate it to production department 1 and production department 2. We ignore the fact that I suggested maybe support department 1 was human resources. So we ignore the fact that the people in support department 2, maintenance, in my example, also use human resources. Okay. And we allocate directly to the production departments only. The sequential method or step-down approach says, you know what, we're going to recognize, we're going to take into account that support departments also support other support departments. And so we are going to decide the order in which we allocate the support departments. And we are asked here that to allocate support department 1 first. It says assuming they're allocated first. We are going to allocate support department 1 first. And what that means, what that's going to look like is we take the 20,000 from support department 1 and we allocate it not just to the production departments, but to the other support departments. And so the $20,000 from support department 1 is going to be divided up across support department 2 and production department 1 and 2. Then we take the new total for support department 2. That's going to include not just the $15,500, but it's going to include the $15,500 plus whatever allocation it got from support department 1. And then we take that new total and allocate it to the production departments. There's no reason we have to do production support department 1 first. One rationale for doing production department first could be that it has the highest cost. It could be that we decide that support department 1 supports the other departments more than support department 2 supports human resources. Or maybe there's not a lot of maintenance in the human resource department. That seems reasonable. So there's no right or wrong answer to do these steps. For our purposes, the exercise will tell us which one to do first.
If you were using this in an actual accounting situation,
Mm-hmm.
would you denote which support you allocated first?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Like,
would it be in their
books?
financial statements? No. But there would be a record, like the backup or the supporting documentation that actually shows that the allocation. And so you'd want to have a rationale for putting them in the order that you chose. But there's no wrong order,
Mm-hmm.
but you should have a reason for the order you chose. And it probably shouldn't be something like, well, it's alphabetical, you know. It should be something that makes sense from an accounting standpoint.
But you would, like in your books, you would choose, all right, this is support department 1, and this is 2, and then you would allocate them in that order.
Yep. And keep in mind, this is our simple example where we have just 2 support departments.
Yeah.
But in a real world situation, there are probably significantly more than 2. You know, we have more than just human resources and maintenance that are supporting production. And so we're supporting the work of our company. So we would have to that step-down approach might be 4 different support departments, and the first one gets allocated to the other 3 support departments plus the 7 production departments. And then we have just 3 support departments. We allocate that one to 2 plus the production departments. And you know, that's why it's called the step-down or sequential approach. We decide in what order or the sequence of the allocations. And you'd probably want to be consistent and do it the same way every time, but just like anything else in accounting, sometimes things change and you might make a determination to change the way you're doing it. But you wouldn't want to every year say, okay, what do we do first this year? You know, you'd want to have a reason for that. The reason that it's less critical, where I say there's not a wrong answer, is because, as I explained in the last exercise, all of the support department cost still ends up being reported. It's not like we're changing the totals, we're just changing the allocation of those totals. And it really is an internal decision, so you're not going to see that in their financial statements because it's really not public information.
Yeah.
I can't imagine why they'd want to keep it a secret, like it's not a trade secret. Oh, we did it this way. It's not that level of confidential information. It's just something that doesn't need to be public.
Is there kind of a rule of thumb where you would want to allocate support departments that support other support departments more directly? Like, would you go, all right, since HR has to support, we'll say everybody, we would want to allocate them first. And where maintenance more directly supports the production, we would want to allocate them last.
Yeah, I think that would be a reasonable approach.
Okay.
Yeah. As I said, there's not a wrong answer, but this is certainly something that your auditors could ask about. But again, they're not going to be terribly concerned about it because it doesn't affect the big picture. It's really about internal decision-making and recognizing which products are costing more and that kind of thing. So, but it's really not external. It doesn't change the totals. And so it's not a huge concern for like the auditing staff and so on. So, which is why we say if the direct method gives you basically the same answer, just use the direct method. It's easier. So, all right, so let's see how to do this for this specific exercise then. We are asked to allocate support department 1, and support department 1 is allocated based on the number of employees. So we're going to ignore the number of employees in support department 1 because we're not allocating its costs to itself. Yes, the human resource department, and I know it doesn't say that, but that's what I'm pretending it is. The human resource department also has employees, 9 of them, and so they're also using some of their own support department cost, but we ignore that. We are only going to be looking at the activity level or the level of the cost driver for the departments that are going to receive an allocation. If we included support department 1, we would end up allocating part of the cost to support department 1. And that's not what we want to do. So to calculate, and I think I'll go ahead and use the percentage approach in this exercise so that you can see, oh, I know it's a low battery. So we can see what that would look like. So let's see the total number of employees for support department 2, production department 1 and 2. So let's add that together. And we can see that there are 50 total employees. Support department 2 has 7 of those 50 employees. 7 out of 50 is 14%. Production department 1 has 25 of the 50, or 50% of the employees, and production department 2 has 18 out of 50, or 36%. So when we allocate support department 1, we're allocating it based on these percentages. 14% of the cost of human resources is going to go to the maintenance department, support department 2.
Cindy, how did you get the percentages again? You divided what?
So the first thing I had to do was figure out how many employees there were, because that's the basis for allocating. So I had to figure out how many employees there were total. I did not include the 9 employees from human resources or support department 1. So I just added up those. And then for each department, I took the number of employees in that department and divided by the total employees that we're allocating. So 7 divided.
Oh, okay, so okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Yep. And then we just need to multiply the percentage times the $20,000 that we're allocating from support department 1. So 50%, or 1/2 of the cost, goes to production department 1. And then 36%, or 7,200, goes to production department 2. And then it wouldn't hurt if we just check ourselves, make sure that we have completely allocated those costs. So I'm going to do that here. And just add, whoops, little offline there. Just add those together. And sure enough, that's the $20,000 that we needed to allocate from support department 1. Support department 1 now has no cost left in there. We fully allocated it out to support department 2 and the 2 production departments. That's all we need to do for this exercise, but I want to do the next step because I'm never happy just doing what's in the
Yeah, just one more question. Oh,
yeah.
Really quickly. So you took the 14% and multiplied it by what? to get the 2,800.
The 20,000.
Oh, down, isn't that 28,000 down here? Oh, so you did the 20,000 times 14%.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. And
Sorry, I'm trying to take notes
I
and
totally
keep up. Thank you.
I count on you, Jamie. I count on you to ask the questions, especially if I'm going too fast. Anybody else with questions at this point? So you know where we are now. So at this point, I'm going to put in another line for totals. This line is not truly necessary at this point, but I want you to see where we are. I'm going to call it subtotal. So now in the support department 2, we have the $15,500 that are the direct costs plus the $2,800 that we allocated. And so that's $18,300 in cost right now in support department 2. Again, the $15,500 that were the direct costs right here, plus the $2,800 we just allocated from human resources. We can do the same totals for production department 1. So we had 99,000 of direct cost plus 10,000. So that's a total of 109. And then for production department 2, we had 79,000 of direct cost plus 7,200. So that's 86,200. So if I were to add those all together, we would still have the same total cost that we had if we just added all 4 departments on, on this line right here. So if you add those 4 up, it will give you the same answer. We still have all of the costs accounted for in this line that I've labeled subtotal cost. So how do I know we're not done? I know we're not done because we still have costs in support department 2 that we need to get to the production departments. Everybody with me so far? So, and what I'm doing now goes beyond what the exercise asks us to do, but this is the second step that would have to happen for Snowy River Stallion Incorporated. And we are told right here that costs from support department 2 are allocated based on asset value. So support department 1's out of it. They're fully allocated, they're done. We're not doing anything with them anymore. What we are doing now is the second step in the step down or sequential approach. We're taking support department 2, these now $18,300, and we're going to allocate it to the 2 production departments based on their asset value that I have highlighted right now. So I need to know what the total asset value is for those 2 departments. I'm just adding up the 2 asset values for production department 1 and production department 2. $11,330. The total asset value for those 2 production departments. I didn't include support department 1, it's already done. I didn't include support department 2 because we're not allocating cost to ourselves. Support department 2. So now we can calculate the percentages for those asset value totals just for the production departments. So we'll start with production department 1, that has $6,230 worth of assets. That's out of or divided by the total, 11,330. We're going to have to be careful here because, oh, that's right. We don't have to check ourselves. We don't have a check my work for the part I'm adding on to the end of the exercise. I was going to say we're going to have to be careful because it's rounding and the software is not going to like it, but we're good. We don't have to worry about the software at this point. So when I did that math, I came up with 54.9867, blah, blah, blah. I'm just gonna round it to 55%. Nice and neat. And then for production department 2, I already know it's going to be 45% because it has to add up to 100%. But you could do the math, 5,100 divided by 11,330 to get the 45% if you really just want to check yourself. Now we can take the total here we go. We're going to take this 18,300 and allocate it to each production department based on those percentages that we just calculated. So 18,300 times 55%, we are going to allocate to production department 1, $10,065. And for production department 2, we're going to allocate the other 45% or $8,235. Last step, and I haven't left myself enough room at the bottom, so I'm just going to put this up at the top here above production department 1 and production department 2. I'm going to calculate the total cost that's now in that production department. We had our subtotal here for production department 1 of 109,000. And we just added to that or allocated to that department, support department 2 cost of 10,065. Remember that support department 2 cost also includes some cost from support department 1. Do the same thing for production department 2, starting with the subtotal cost that includes support department 1. Add to that the support department 2 allocation that we just did. And we get those totals that I have up here at, whoops, at the top. So that's our final answer. If this exercise had us go through all of the steps, that would be our final answer. If you do the math, if I were to add up all of these department costs, you will see that we haven't changed the total cost. We have simply changed the distribution. We've taken the support departments and allocated them out to the production departments. So they're fully allocated. They're now down to 0. And the production departments have all of the cost associated with them, including, for both cases, human resources and maintenance in my example. Questions? Does this make sense? See what we did? Okay. So the direct method is definitely the easiest. We only allocate support departments to production departments. And if we had 10 support departments, we would allocate each one separately, and we don't need to know what happens with any of the other ones to do the calculation for one particular support department, because we don't allocate support to support departments. In the sequential or step-down approach, we do, but we decide in which order we're going to allocate them. And so once we allocate one support department, it's done. We don't have to do anything more with it. Now we're allocating just to the remaining departments. I might have a picture I can show you. Let me get my pictures off the screen and just show you what this looks like. Okay. So this is the direct method where we had 2 support departments, 2 production departments. We allocate the support department only to the production departments. So janitorial didn't impact or wasn't allocated to the cafeteria. Well, do you think there's some cleanup to do in the cafeteria? Well, I hope so. They're using janitorial services, but because they're a support department using the direct method, we don't allocate anything to them. So you can see all 310,000 from janitorial went only to the production departments. And all the costs from the cafeteria only went to the production departments. Do you think it's possible that some of the janitorial staff eat at the cafeteria? I imagine, but we don't allocate anything to them because they're a support department. In the direct method, it's very clean, straightforward. Find the next picture.
Well, real quick, because I wanted to ask, and it looks like this answers it anyway, but you don't have, if you're using the direct method, you can choose the cost driver for each support department different, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. So I didn't do the math real quick, but looking at the numbers, it looks like for the janitorial, they're doing it by square feet, and then for the cafeteria, they're doing it by the number of employees.
Yeah, I would assume. I mean, and that makes sense, right? And yes, you absolutely can do that. You do not have to have a single cost driver. Each department can have its own cost driver. Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Let me go to the other one. There it is. So this is an example of what the sequential method looks like. So you can see that they decided in which order they would allocate them. So they decided to allocate janitorial first. They just as easily could have decided to allocate the cafeteria first. But they allocated janitorial first, and they allocated it, same dollar amount, they allocated to each one of the remaining departments, including the support department of the cafeteria. Once we fully allocate the janitorial department, now we take the new higher total cost for cafeteria because it includes the janitorial piece, and we allocate that new total to the remaining departments. We easily could have more than 2 support departments and more than 2 production departments. So you can imagine how wide and tall this analysis becomes, because we would have to step through each one of the support departments. Questions at this point on either one of those two? The next one is the more challenging. I don't want to scare anyone, but I already went through why it doesn't need to be scary, because here we go. Because you're not going to be asked to reproduce this on your own in a testing situation. It is on the problem, but there's a tutorial video already for that. If you are working on the problem next week, if you're working on the problem and have questions about it after you watch the video, I will be happy to help with those questions also. But start with the video if you have questions.
Or, I know it's not for a bit anyway, but for the next test, are we more likely to see for the sequential method a question like exactly like number 2, or more like the actual work we put into number 2? So would it be just the first allocation, or would it be for each step of the allocation?
That's a good question.
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that because I didn't just make the exam.
Right.
But I would be happy to answer that question.
Well, when we review it, if we can remember.
Yeah, why don't we, if I can get my computer to do what I want it to do, let's just go look at that. So let me put my green check marks in there, although it's not going to save them anyway. Let's take a look. Because I just really don't know. Well, where's exam 2? There is no exam 2. What on earth? Okay. All right, so exam 1 and 2 are there, and then exam 3, 4, 5 are at the end. Bizarre. So the exam 2 extra credit as I already told you, is what we're about to do. It is a reciprocal services, a reciprocal allocation. What chapter is this in? 19. So that's direct. This is sequential. Yep, so you do have to do both steps for the question that is on the test. Yep. Yep. Okay, so now you know, and we don't have to try to remember 3 weeks from now that oh wait.
Well, you still have to try to remember.
Yeah. But you have to know how to do the whole thing.
Yep.
Right? Okay, so as I already mentioned, the reciprocal allocation method is the most difficult because it involves algebra. It involves setting up a system of equations and solving that system. So those of you who are not terribly algebra friendly and you know who you are, and I may not know that about you, but you know who you are. If you know you struggle with algebra, it's unfortunate, but I don't want to mask anything. I don't have any magic solution other than we're going to practice with it multiple times between class and the homework problem and the practice set, if you wish to do that for the exam. And I already told you, it's not on the exam per se. It is that extra credit problem. And there's no time limit on that extra credit problem. And it's extra credit. So if you just wanted to say, I'm not doing it, you have that option. I would encourage you at least to try it. It's not intended to be done during the same time period, the same 3-hour window that you have for the exam. There is no time limit on it. So you could actually, if you wanted, look at it now, work on it between now and the time the exam is due. Work on it.
Probably be more helpful to do it closer to when we're doing all of this rather than closer to the test.
I would think, yeah. So I was just about to suggest that it might be easier to work on it now, maybe not this week, but maybe. We've got a long weekend. Maybe, I'm not suggesting you should worry about exam 1 before you worry about the extra credit for exam 2. Definitely do that. But you are welcome to do it now if you find it easier to do it now when it's fresh in your mind. And then you don't have to worry about the reciprocal method again because it's not on the exam itself, which will be like 3 or 4 weeks from now. There are only
Cindy?
3. Yeah.
Oh, excuse me, you were still talking.
Okay. No.
I just forgot how the exam, we can't start the exam and work on it in parts. We have to, once we start it, we're timed, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that is correct. The exams do have a time limit on them, which is 3 hours, which is more than enough time, but you can't pause it and come back to it later. So
okay.
If something were to happen that you were interrupted, you have a family emergency or something like that, you can let me know and we can figure out what we're going to do about that. But in general, you need to start the exam and finish it within 3 hours, or if you have accommodations in place longer than that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and that's true for all the exams. But the extra credit is not part of that 3 hours, and there's no time limit on the extra credit. So let's look at this reciprocal method. And as I've already been saying, it is the most difficult, it's the most involved, but it's also the most accurate. I've been describing how we can use the direct and the step down or reciprocal, not reciprocal, step down or sequential approach for lots of support departments and lots of production departments. We are only using these reciprocal method for 2 and 2, 2 support, 2 production, because the more departments we throw in there, the more complicated the math gets, and we're not going to be doing that. So you're only going to have 2 and 2 every time that we look at a reciprocal question. 2 and 2, 2 support, 2 production departments. You can see in the diagram on the screen right now how this is going to work from a logistics standpoint. We are going to be allocating both support departments to themselves as well as to the other departments. Okay. So back to the example that I was using in the Snowy River question, we would be allocating cafeteria to itself and to janitorial and to the production departments. And we would be allocating, what did I say, cafeteria? We'd be allocating janitorial, the other support department, to itself, as well as to the other support department and the production departments. And that's what makes it difficult, is we are allocating both to each other and to themselves. So that's why we need this system of equations. And so we are going to have 2 separate calculations, just like we did for the step down approach, 2 separate steps, 2 separate calculations. But because we're allocating it to itself, it makes it more, we don't clear out one account and then just work with what we have left. We're going to be working with both support departments at the same time. I'm showing you this because you can see that the PowerPoint walks you through specific steps. We are just going to go to our exercise and I will show you what the steps look like. But you have the example here in the PowerPoint. Remember, you do have access to these PowerPoints, and so you are welcome to look at that if it's helpful for you. Let's go to our exercise and we will go through each one of these steps of setting up the equations and then solving the system of equations. Support Department Cost Allocation Reciprocal Services Method. Blue Africa Incorporated produces laptops and desktop computers. The company's production activities mainly occur in what the company calls its laser and forming departments. So those are the 2 production departments. The cafeteria and security departments support the company's production activities and allocate costs based on the number of employees and square feet respectively. So the cafeteria is allocated based on number of employees. The security department is allocated based on square feet. The total cost of the security department is $273,000. The total cost of the cafeteria department is $180,000. The number of employees and the square footage in each department are as follows. So this is what we're going to need to determine the allocation. So as I said, what makes this different is we're recognizing that every support department not only supports the production departments, but also the other support departments. So if we think back to the last example, the last exercise we did, we allocated cafeteria first, right? Or was it janitorial? Now I can't remember. Can't even remember. It really doesn't change our exercise. we allocated one department first to the other support department and the production departments, and then we said, now we're done with that. But in this, we're going to be allocating both support departments to each other as well as to the production departments. So, oops, here we go. So for the cafeteria is going to be allocated based on number of employees. And so we're going to be including those employees. The security department is allocated based on square footage. And so we're going to be allocating to these square feet. We're going to allocate to each other, not just do one at a time and then ignore that one that's already been done. So let's find our totals. So our total employees that we're going to allocate to, based on, is 10 plus 40 plus 50, that's 100 employees. And for square footage, $2,400 plus 4,000 plus 1,600. Whoops.
Do we leave out? So we're leaving out cafeteria department?
Yes, so we're allocating to each other. Both security and cafeteria get allocated to each other. And that's what makes it different. We recognize that cafeteria uses cafeteria resources, but we don't include those employees because we can't leave any cost in the cafeteria department. We need to get it fully out to the production departments eventually is the goal. But yes, to answer your exact question, Jamie, yes, we don't include those cafeteria employees because we don't want to leave any cost in the cafeteria department. And for the security department that's allocated based on square footage, yes, security department does provide some security for itself, but we can't leave any cost in the security department. So if we were to add that 590 square feet, we would then have percentages that would leave cost in the security department, which would not be helpful for us. We'd then have to address that. So is everybody okay with where we are right now?
Yeah, thank you.
So here's how we do the equations. This is the algebra part. So we'll start with the security department just because it's listed first. So the security department, costs $273,000. Those are the direct costs for the security department. It's given right here, $273,000. But those aren't the only costs because they also use the cafeteria. And so we're going to allocate some of the cafeteria cost to the security department based on the number of employees. The security department is 10 of the 100 employees. That's 10% of the total. Everyone with me so far?
10% of the cafeteria total?
10% of the total employees. And so yes, it is going to get 10% of the cost of the cafeteria. So the fully allocated cost of the security department is the direct cost of $273,000 plus 10% of the cost of the cafeteria, because they have 10% of the employees. Does that make sense?
How did you get the 10%?
It's the 10 employees for the security department divide out of the total of 100.
Okay.
So now we're going to do the same thing for the cafeteria. And set up the equation for the cafeteria. The direct cost of the cafeteria is $180,000, but they also use some security. The security department is allocated based on square footage. The cafeteria is 2,400 square feet out of the 8,000 square feet. So 2,400 square feet divided by 8,000. 2,400 square feet divided by 8,000. The cafeteria is 30% of the total square footage. And so we're going to allocate to them 30% of the security cost. Those are our two equations. You can see that each one has two variables. And so we need to solve, we need to substitute one equation into the other one and solve for just one variable. We can't solve an equation with just two variables, or with two variables, not just. We can't solve an equation with two variables, so we need to substitute one into the other so we have just one variable. Before we do that though, yeah, go ahead.
You got the 30% by dividing the 590 with the 8,000?
Not the 590, no, it's this is the cafeteria. So it's the 2,400 square feet for the cafeteria divided by the 8,000 square feet total.
Okay, thanks.
So if you're wondering, why did I put cafeteria in there? We already know the cafeteria cost, it's 180,000. Why didn't you just put 180,000 in there? Here's the reason. Because the cafeteria costs 180,000 directly, but it also includes some of the cost of the security department. So before I move on, are there any questions about how to set up the two formulas? So here's how we solve it. Now, in general, for the math, I would say it doesn't matter. You can plug cafeteria into security or security into cafeteria. Unfortunately, what I found last semester is because of rounding, because of where they tell you to round, it will impact your answer. And so I don't have a magic way for you to know which one. I'm just going to tell you to be careful about your rounding. And if you are working on, say, the practice set or the extra credit and getting stuck, ask me for help, or try plugging the equation in the opposite order. If you're plugging cafeteria into security, try it the other way around. Because the way, and I can't remember, I think it was the extra credit problem, but I can't remember for sure. It tells you specifically how to round. And if you do it in the opposite order, your answers will be wrong because of the way it tells you to round. You could be doing everything correctly. So please, if that happens to you, ask for help. Try reversing your order. Okay, so let's see how we are going to solve this. We are going to take these, I'm just going to start with the security formula. This is the formula that or the equation that we already have. 273,000 plus 10% of the cafeteria, but we don't know what the cafeteria is. We don't have a number for that. But I have another equation here that tells me what the cafeteria is in terms of security. So I'm just going to take this part, the 180,000 plus 30% of the security, and just plug that in. So what I did, I just took, change my color so you can see it. I just took this and I plugged it in to here. Okay. I know the cafeteria is equal to that, 180,000 plus 30% of the cost of security. So I just plugged that into the formula where it said cafeteria. I put it in parentheses because I needed that whole quantity times 10%. Okay, so that's algebra using substitution to solve this system of equations. You can do a little more algebra here. I'm going to try to simplify this as much as possible. First thing I'm going to do is distribute the 10% to the two terms inside the parentheses. 10% times 180,000 is 18,000. And then 10% times 30% times security is 0.03 times security, right? All I did was distribute the 10% to the two terms inside the parentheses. Going to combine like terms. So I have two constants there, 273,000 plus 18,000. Oops. 291,000. Everybody good so far? Now I'm going to subtract. I need to get the two variables on the same side and the constant on the other side. So I'm going to subtract from each side 0.03 security. If I have one whole security and I subtract from it 0.03 security, what do I get? 0.97. Oops. 0.97 security. And on the other side, plus 0.03 minus 0.03, that just becomes 0. I didn't write those on separate lines because I don't have enough room on my screen. Now to get security by itself, it's multiplied by 0.97. We're going to divide each side by 0.97. And we get security equals 291,000 divided by 0.97. 300,000. Okay. Everybody with me so far? So we know that security department is $300,000. That's the full cost. It includes the $273,000 worth of direct cost plus $27,000 that comes from the cafeteria. And so we can allocate that $300,000 based on the square footage. Security gets allocated based on square footage. So let's go ahead and allocate the security department. The square footage for the cafeteria is 2,400, and that's out of the total 8,000. So that's 30% of the security cost. Oops. 30% of 300,000. $90,000. Okay. For the laser department, that's 4,000 of the 8,000 square footage. That's half the cost, 150,000. And for the forming department, it's 1,600 feet out of the 8,000. That's the remaining 20%. Or $60,000. For this exercise, that's all you needed to do. That's all. I know it's not easy. But just like we saw in the last exercise, they didn't show us the next step. And we're going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to erase part of what I have here on the screen, these formulas down here at the bottom. Before I do that, does anyone have any questions about what's here right now? Okay. So security was 300,000 total. I want to know how much the cafeteria is in total. And so I'm going to just plug into the cafeteria equation. Cafeteria equals 180,000. Those are the direct costs, but they're also getting an allocation from security, 30% of security. And so the total cafeteria costs are, we already knew the 90,000 coming from security. We had that in the previous step. And so the cafeteria has $180,000 in direct costs plus the 90,000 that we allocated from security, a total of 270,000. If I were to put in here, I'm going to put it over here just because that's where there's room, security, and we allocated 300,000 out of the security department to those other departments. Now we're going to do the cafeteria. Oops. And we just calculated that the total cost of the cafeteria was 270,000. Right? That's what I have down here at the bottom of the screen. We're going to allocate the cafeteria to the other departments based on the number of employees. So the laser department has 40 out of the 100 employees. It's going to get 40% of the total, 40% of the 270,000 or 108,000. The forming department has 50 of the 100 employees. It's going to get half of the cost. and security has 10 of the 100 employees, it's going to get 10% of the cost. We were told at the beginning of the exercise that the cafeteria department cost was $180,000. And we were told that the security department's cost was $273,000. But if I were to put the totals in here, like that, you can see the direct cost, the direct cost of the cafeteria was $180,000, excuse me. But they received an additional $90,000 worth of cost from the security department. That's why we allocated out $270,000. The security department's direct cost was $273,000. It received $27,000 from the cafeteria allocation. That's why we allocated out a total of $300,000. What we allocated was not only the direct costs that were given, but also the indirect cost from the other support department. This is the reciprocal approach. You can see it is more challenging, but if you just take it one step at a time, don't get overwhelmed, don't throw your hands up, please, and say, I can't do algebra. If you just take it one step at a time, we're given all the information we need to be able to answer, to set up the system of equations and to do the allocation.
So when we're doing the allocation for this, we're allocating, so for like the cafeteria, we're allocating full 270, even though we only technically have the 180.
Well, we have the 180 plus the 30% from the security department. So we only have 180 in direct costs, but we allocate, yes, the whole amount. And then for security, same thing. We allocate the whole amount that includes part of the cost of the cafeteria.
Yeah.
And so if I were to total these columns here, you'd see that, you know, they're fully allocated and to zero. And all of the cost ends up being on the two production departments. The cost that they got from security and from cafeteria gets added to their direct costs, and we aren't told what those are. But obviously, if this was our company, we would know that. This is not a easy concept. I hope I didn't sabotage things by starting out telling you it's not on the test, because that could cause you to just tune out. I hope that's not the case, because it is an important concept, because we just went through, it's the most accurate cost. And so if this results in a cost that's different than the direct method, the sequential method, we should be using this approach. But I get that it's complicated. And I also understand that not everyone is friends with algebra. So I think I've done enough for today. But don't go yet. I'm going to clear what's on the screen if that's okay with everybody. Exercise 4, I would like you to try on your own. It's the direct method. Exercise 5, I would like you to try on your own. It is the sequential method. When we come back, a week from today, after you've taken exam 1, we will do exercise 6 together. You're welcome to try it on your own. If you're just right now going, yeah, I didn't get any of that, don't worry about it. Put it aside until after exam 1. We will do one more example here together in class a week from today. And hopefully doing it more than once together will help you to see how it works. If not, you've got that fallback position. I don't have to do it on the test. If I have my preference though, you'll do it, you'll get it. If you want to try it, try exercise 6 on your own, please feel free to do that. But we will pick up here 1 week from today on the 24th of February. And I'll answer any questions you might have about 4 and 5. You'll notice both of them also have a show me how, and these are the less complicated versions. So that's all we're going to do for today. Any questions before I stop the recording? Okay.
So I don't know how to do it, but like, what is it doing? Like, why would one department do all our costs to 3 different ones?
Okay. Yeah. So the support, we need to know what is driving our costs. So to make appropriate decisions about our product and which products should we be making, which products are profitable, which ones are dogs that are costing us money. You know, we're not, in order to set proper pricing and make those business decisions, we have to understand what our total costs are, you know, the all-in cost for making that product or for selling that product. And so that's really the driving force behind what we're doing here, as well as what we talked about in activity-based costing, that we really just need to know. We might think we know what causes our costs to go up and go down. We might think we know which products are more expensive to produce. This helps us to actually see it in numbers rather than looking at those and saying, yeah, well, the cafeteria, that's just a support department. We're recognizing, yeah, but it's supporting production. And so if we're trying to cost the product, we need to know how much production is costing. If we didn't have production, we wouldn't need the cafeteria. It wouldn't need to be so big. Does that answer your question? Why do we do this? So that we really understand what our total production costs are, even though the cafeteria is not producing the product for us. So the cafeteria, just to reinforce that one more time before we finish. The cafeteria department as a support department is not part of the product cost. It's not direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. But it is part of the running of our business if we choose to have a cafeteria. And so, janitorial is supporting, is a little bit more directly production related because we'd have to clean the factory, right? But the cafeteria is, I think, a better example of, you know, those support departments that are not they're not helping us with production, but they are maybe an important part of the running of our business. We might still have a cafeteria even if we were a merchandising company. Questions? Anybody? Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you for being here and good luck on the test. Let me know immediately if you run into any kind of technical issues. Don't forget to open your ebook before you start the exam. And no class Tuesday, so our next class will be 1 week from today.